Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from New Jersey, we have Jamie Baldanza. Jamie is the creator and director of the award-winning docuseries Wildlands, Wild Horses. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. I would love to start off with talking about your docuseries. Can you tell us about Wildlands, Wild Horses, especially the Twin Peaks premiere, which is this Wednesday, June 9th?
Sure. So the docuseries Wildlands, Wild Horses is obviously about our wild horses in the United States. A lot of people don't know that they exist, but they do, and they're fighting a battle to keep existing. So my partner Deb and I decided to create this docuseries to help bring awareness to their cause. So basically, we travel to 12 different herd management areas, and we show you what it's like in the life of a wild horse. We show you their social dynamics and behaviors, what they eat, how they find water. And each place is so uniquely different. So one episode you might get mountains, and the other episode you'll get the desert. So it's really, really cool to see these locations. In addition to that, we also talk to all the stakeholders who are involved within that herd management area. And basically, most of our wild horses live on our public lands. So there's many opinions involved. So we talk to government officials, which are the Bureau of Land Management. We'll talk to ranchers who have livestock on the land, scientists, advocates, artists and photographers who visit them. So we can get everyone's perspective. And then lastly, we put a big emphasis on adopting wild horses. So basically, to keep numbers in control, the government rounds them up and puts them in holding pens, and then they are available to the public to get adopted. So there's about 50,000 wild horses in holding pens right now, and we are trying to share their stories and successful adoption stories so that people can know about it, learn about it, and if they're ever interested in adopting, they can do so. So we feature an adoption story that is from the herd that we just visited. So you can kind of see where they came from and where they ended up. And that's kind of the gist of the docuseries. We are premiering the very first episode on YouTube, which is called Twin Peaks, and that's located in Northern California. It's a giant herd management area, so we had a lot of trouble trying to find the horses because they live across 800,000 acres, but it's a very fun episode. You learn a lot, and we just really hope everyone comes out and enjoys it.
What happens if no one adopts them from these holding pens?
So a couple things. They can get sent. There's what's called long-term holding and short-term holding. Usually if they're older, they will get sent to long-term holding and they will be there for the rest of their lives. Short-term is where it's available for the public to come see and adopt. So basically, if a horse in short-term holding is put up for adoption 3 times and not get adopted, they get what's called 3 strikes. And then they turn into sale authority. And you can then buy that horse for $25 without limitations. Or they can get sent to long-term holding after that. So it's a touchy subject, and I'm not quite sure where else they can go after those 2 options. But we need more options, and sometimes most times sanctuaries will step up and get the unwanted horses that the public, don't make out to be like their version of beautiful.
Okay, so what does long-term holding look like? Is it they're running around on a wild public lands, or are they just like in cages?
So long-term holding can be a variety of different things. They are basically private facilities that the government leases to hold the horses at. Some of them are grassy pastures, which could be great, but a lot of them are just dirt lots and they're all crammed in there and disease can run rampant. So it's they're not open to the public, so we don't get to really see them. But it can go either way. It could be beautiful and grassy, and the other one could be dirt lots.
Can you tell us about America's Forgotten Equines Act, or the SAFE Act, that is in the U.S. Congress right now? What is it about that legislation that makes it so important?
So the SAFE Act would stop the export of our America's horses to be shipped to slaughter to Canada and Mexico. So basically, there's the slaughter pipeline, and when horses are unwanted, owners bring them to what's called either a kill pen or an auction, and kill buyers come and buy the horses, and then they ship them and sell them for their meat. This act would stop that. So definitely call your congressman and ask them to sign on. It's HR 3355. Ask them to sign on to the SAFE Act.
What happens exactly from these kill pens? Okay, so I go there, I can buy a horse for $25, was it?
Okay, so that's two different things. There's the holding pen for wild horses, and then there's the kill pen that's just completely separate, where anyone can just go and buy a horse. So it's complicated. So basically, with the $25, that's if our Bureau of Land Management puts up a wild horse for adoption 3 times, no one decides to adopt it, and that's for $125. They get what's called 3 strikes. That makes them a sale authority horse. Now, the sale authority horse can be sold to anyone without limitations, and therefore is an easier way to end up in the slaughter pipeline. So it's all connected, but there are 2 separate things.
Take me through how this works as far as the wild horses. They're out in the wild, and then they get rounded up?
Yes. They can just be eating grass one day, and then the government. So what they have to do before they can round up wild horses or burros, they have to put out an EA, which is an environmental assessment, and then the public has time to comment on that, and then they'll decide whether to move forward with the roundup or not. So once they round them up, usually it's by helicopter. Sometimes it's a bait trap, but most times it's helicopter. Then they get rounded up by that, and then they get sent to the holding facility for processing. Once they get processed, they get sent to short-term holding facilities so they can be adopted out. And then how that they can end up in the slaughter pipeline is when you adopt a wild horse, you have to hold on to that wild horse for 1 year until you receive the title, which proves that you have ownership of the wild horse. After you get that title, you can do whatever you want with it. So if you want to sell them, you can. If you want to bring them to auction, you can. If you want to give them to someone else, you can. But you're really not supposed to do that within that first year. But why there's an influx of wild horses this year in the slaughter pipeline is because the government currently has an adoption incentive program where they pay you, with our taxpayers' money, they pay you $1,000 to take a horse.
Really?
So yes, and there's just been a New York Times article that came out about it that explains all this, and it's pretty fascinating. He did a lot of great undercover type work in interviewing people and finding people who took advantage of the program. So this guy would adopt a whole bunch of horses, get $1,000 for each horse, and then he would drop them off at the kill pen and make even more money. So there are good people making use of the program, but there's also a lot of people taking advantage of the program at the horse's expense.
So why would the government create this incentive?
I think because they need to make room in the holding pens. They need to clear out the holding pens so they can round up more horses. That's my guess. I don't know if that's fact or fiction, but seems most likely.
They kind of know what they're doing here, right? They know that they're paying people $1,000, and if they don't have, say, a sanctuary, they
Hmm.
kind of have an idea what's going to happen to that horse.
I mean, it's definitely possible. I do believe maybe it started with good intentions and backfired. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Um, but that seems to be the case.
Now, what threats do wild horses face today?
Um, well, there's a couple things. So the biggest thing is one of the biggest things, not the biggest thing, is sustainability of the land. Water is life out there. I mean, wild horses are hardy. They can survive off sagebrush if they had to. So it's a lot of like drought is a huge part of how healthy a wild horse is if they get enough water and of course the food. But another main reason why they might be in danger is because what's called range wars and the public land. So basically, ranchers can have leasing rights or grazing rights to the same land that wild horses currently roam on, and so they put their livestock and their cattle or and their their sheep, the cattle, all of that on there, and then they all are sharing the same water, they're sharing the same land, and then a lot of it is there's not enough for all of them. So instead of asking the rancher to take off their livestock, which they can't because they're in a contract with, the wild horses get rounded up.
Oh, I see. Because the rancher
Hmm.
gets a lease on the land and then he puts his livestock on the land, then the horses that were there already are now kind of squeezed out because of the livestock. And then they decide there's just too many horses around. So they got to round those guys up instead of canceling that contract because they're making money on that.
Yeah, and I believe, and I mean, don't quote me on this. I believe each contract is around 10 years. So it's not like you can just cancel them unless it's like an emergency cancel. But and then one third one is overpopulation. There some believe there really isn't an overpopulation, and then of course some do, but a big key to helping with that is birth control, and that just kind of slows the growth of the population, so it gives them more of an opportunity to live out the rest of their lives in the wild, since if they keep the numbers down they have less chance of getting rounded up.
How does that work, the birth control for the horses?
So basically, there's a couple programs, and there are so many amazing people out there who have darting programs, and the majority use PZP. It's a concoction that you put into a dart, and you just go out there with a dart gun and you shoot their tushes. And that's really it. I mean, you just have to keep track at who you darted, and this is it's more of a successful program when the herd is well known, like people name the horses and document them. So let's say Aniki is, a great herd to do PZP on because everyone knows who every single horse is and you can document who's gotten darted. Twin Peaks would be a lot more difficult because they're not used to humans. They're spread out over 800,000 acres, and it would be really difficult to find them and
Uh-huh.
dart them. So it's again a double-edged sword. It can be really successful, but only more likely on the smaller herds.
All they have to do is dart them and they become infertile.
Yes.
Interesting. Now, who names them?
Usually it's the locals who live by the herds and the nonprofit organizations that keep track of those herds. Yeah, so it's just maybe photographers that always go out and visit. So each kind of herd has their own little group of locals that, keeps tabs on them.
So once somebody like Redface, say, in Theodore
Hmm.
Roosevelt National Park,
Yep.
say somebody names him
Hmm.
and then everybody just decides, oh, that's a good name. I'm going to call him that.
Yeah,
Is that how it kind of works?
basically, yeah, yeah. It also depends on the group. Like if it's a well-known group that's been documenting them for a while, it's, they kind of by default get naming rights.
I got you.
And then if everyone else is just naming them whatever they want, it's really hard. to keep following their story because you're like, well, who the hell are you talking about? I don't know who Peter is, you know? I thought it was Redface.
I thought it was Satellite. I thought it was
Yeah,
Redface.
exactly. So I like when it's like one name. There was a like say the Pryor Mountains, the Cloud Foundation had their set of names, and then the Pryor Mustang Wild Range Center had their own names, and then they finally came together and decided we're going to name them together, and that helped a lot.
I would think it would make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Now, what is an HMA, a herd management area?
So a herd management area is a designated area where wild horses are allowed to roam um, on a public land. So basically, if they roam off that area, they can be rounded up. But I mean, usually they just stick to their area.
What are some of the issues that they round up or gather the wild horses? Is it overpopulation? Is it overgrazing? Is it suffering and starvation?
So it can be all three of those. So let's take Nevada. Nevada is a desert with not much rainfall or water. So the horses can get really skinny and dehydrated, and they'll do emergency roundups for that. And a lot of the times, I do believe, and I'll probably get, you know, ridiculed for this, it's justified because these horses are starving and they have no water. Then
Mm-hmm.
you take another area that's thriving in the landscape. The horses are fat and healthy, and they still get rounded up. And you're like, well, okay, you can't really use that to justify why you're rounding them up. So they'll say overpopulation. So they create an AML, which is the appropriate management level, and they decide how many horses is appropriate for that land to be able to sustain itself. They're extremely low, and in some cases, like in the sulfur herd, they haven't retested or recalculated that AML in over 30 years. So I don't know how it's justified to keep using that same number. So they'll say overpopulation. Okay, so say the AML is 300 horses and
Mm-hmm.
there's currently 562. Be like, well, they're over AML. We need to round them up to get the number down. So that's one reason. Another reason.
Now, do you have a favorite wild horse
In the wild or that I adopted?
in the wild? Not Arnie.
Oh, this is tough. I, there's this one horse in McCullough Peaks, Wyoming, and I only met him once, and I don't know his name. I'm sure I could find it out if I could. And he was a Bachelor Stallion, and he would taunt every band stallion that he would see, and he'd go up to them, pick a fight, and play with them. And I just fell in love with him because he was such a spitfire. And I think about him often, and probably my most popular picture is of him and another horse sparring, like across the horizon line. I've always just loved him, but I love Redface. I adore Redface. There's just something about him that whenever I see him, I get so giddy. And then I'd have to say one of his mares, Emmy Lou, she's just so fun and innocent, and she's always so curious, and she's not like a crazy color. She's just your basic chestnut, but I still love her.
So, what is the difference between a band stallion and a bachelor stallion for somebody like myself who's
Sure.
not educated on that?
So a band stallion is the head stallion of what's called a herd or a band or an harem. And basically, he is the leader of all his mares and offspring, and they form this little group. And then a bachelor is a stallion that has been kicked out of a band. So, okay, let's use Redface for example. Say Redface.
Redface is a band stallion and Satellite is a bachelor stallion.
No, a satellite is actually another band stallion.
Really?
Yeah, so we just didn't see his band in that episode because he left them to come spar with Redface and play with Lakota. Um, so then an example of a bachelor, say Redface had an offspring, a colt,
Mm-hmm.
and he's with the group for about 2 or 3 years, and then Redface decides, okay, it's time for you to leave. He will kick him out, and then he's off on his own, and then he'll meet up with other bachelors, and they'll form their own little bachelor group, and then they just sit there and like taunt all the band stallions and try to take their mares. It's really fun to watch.
Sounds it. Sounds like a bar when you're
It
you're
is.
sober and you're
Oh my
watching them.
God. Wild horses, they're just like us. Their dating life is so stressful.
What is it about wild horses that makes you, a Jersey girl, care so
Mhm.
deeply about them?
Well, ever since I could remember, I've had such a love for horses. I would draw them. I would ask my mom to stop on the side of the road so I can look at them over the fence. So it's always been ingrained in me, and it was never far from my mind. And I always promised myself every birthday I would wish for a horse of my very own. Um, but that kind of left when I moved to New York City and I started building a career. I would still find time to ride in the city and Brooklyn stable, but not as much as I liked. And then one day I just like melted down and was like, I need to get horses back in my life. So I went west and just started photographing them and became completely enthralled with their story, where they're from. I mean, people need to go out west and just see the land. If they don't want to see the wild horses, they should see the land. It is absolutely beautiful. Um, and being from New Jersey, we don't have stuff like that out here. They have these beautiful red rocks and sagebrush and mountains, and it's just such a sight to see. And then it just, as I was photographing them, I just could never step away from that again. And then the docuseries came out of that.
Now, what draws you to wild horses as opposed to other animals, though?
Um, I don't know. I just, it's, they're a magnet to me. It's this force that I can't explain. I see them and I'm drawn to them. I don't think, it's funny because my husband's like, you're so passionate about them. Like, do you ever get bored? And I'm like, no. I go out them and just smell that. Like, their smell comforts me. Their wild spirit comforts me. I want to write stories about them. I guess they're my muse in a way. Like, I see them and I'm inspired. I see them, I'm in love. I see them and I get compassionate. It's like they are the base of everything I do. And I know that doesn't really answer your question, but it's just the closest thing is I'm drawn to them and I don't know why.
Now, let's move over to your personal story.
Sure.
When and why did you transition to a plant based diet?
Well, there's two main reasons why I transferred over to a plant-based diet. The first is I wanted to go on a cattle drive my whole life. I saw city slickers and I'm like, I need to do that. And for my 30th birthday, my husband got me a trip to Montana and we did this amazing cattle drive and it was gorgeous. We were riding horses, we were with the cows. And this whole time I'm like oblivious like of where the cows are actually going until on like day 5, they're like, "Okay, now we need to separate the calves from the mothers." And it was awful. Like the babies were crying for the moms and we had to be the barrier between them and I just completely shut down and from then on I decided to try harder to stop eating meat. And it didn't happen overnight for me. It took a while. And then
Mhm.
a second reason is I know they were trying to stop gestation crates for pigs in New Jersey. And when I saw that and learned about it, I got really upset. And I was like, oh, this will definitely get through. And then Chris Christie, who was our governor at the time, vetoed the bill, And then I vowed never to eat pork again, and I haven't to this day. And then I gave up lamb, and then I gave up chicken, and then I gave up beef, and then it was only 2 years ago I gave up dairy, to become 2.5 years ago to become completely plant based.
Now, have you seen any positive changes, both mentally and physically, since
Oh
you've?
my God, yes. It's so crazy. I suffered from migraines since I was 12. The second I gave up dairy, like 75% of my migraines went away. And I was blown away. Also, my hormones balanced out. My energy came back. I used to love naps. Now I take a lot less of them. And my body feels overall amazing.
You had migraines.
Migraines. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you have migraines like every day, every couple of days?
About migraines at least 10 times a month. They were so severe, that I would be bedridden. And, the doctors did what they could, but they could never really figure anything out. So they would treat it instead of try to prevent it. But then dairy happened. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe this was the culprit all these years.
So that's what you really believe that the culprit was dairy.
Yeah, I truly do.
Wow, that's
But the
interesting.
weird thing is, I took allergy tests to try and like rule out if there was a food I was sensitive to, and it didn't come up as a food sensitivity. That was the one major life change. And then, my migraines went away.
Now, did you struggle with anything when you first became plant-based, whether it's traveling or eating out with friends?
Oh yeah. Since I traveled to very remote places to photograph wild horses, restaurants and takeout, I for a while was just on like a French fry diet. It was really, really hard for a while to explain, like, I can't have meat, I can't have dairy. So I struggled a lot of the times. We then resorted to going to the food store and just packing everything. Um, and then my friends and family have always been very supportive. My husband turned vegan, which is great because it just makes, life easier that we don't have to cook two different things. But
Right.
I'm extremely proud of him because we were both heavy meat eaters.
Hmm.
But the thing I struggled with the most was definitely traveling.
Now, what did you learn from that struggle? How did you overcome it?
Um, I just overcame it by accepting the reality that it's gonna take time for this type of diet to trickle down to everywhere, and it's getting better. I remember I was in this little remote town in Northern California, and they had their own veggie burger, and I was just like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" And then, like last summer, I was in a really small town in Utah, and they had vegan pizza. I was like, "What?" So it's getting better. It's getting a lot easier, and I think the companies are starting to realize that this is not a trend and it's here to stay. And so they're starting to develop their products for the plant-based market.
Take us back to that cattle drive. Okay. So
Hmm.
you're going in there and you're thinking you're part of City Slickers and you're having a
Yeah.
great time. And all of a sudden, day 5 shows up and you have to separate these calves from their mothers.
Hmm.
Take us back to that moment.
That was a really hard moment for me. And I remember it was pouring rain, and we're in the mud, and we're in this pen, and we all got assigned our different jobs, and mine particular job was to stand between the mothers, um, and the babies so they couldn't escape to each other. And I'll just never forget the way they screamed for each other. Um, and then it just it just sat with me, and I actually didn't continue to ride the rest of the day because they were then taking the calves. They were leaving the mothers at that place and then taking the calves to the feedlot. And I wasn't okay with that. I was not taking these calves to their death. So I actually faked being sick and stayed behind, My husband stayed with me, and I it's just I became so hyper aware after that of, livestock trucks on the highway, like it just opened up so many different things. Now, granted, if I were a cow, these cows had pretty good lives because they were truly free range cows, but it still started that process for me. Um, it was a sad but eye opening day.
So when you think about that day and you think about being between the mother and the babies, what really sticks out in your mind?
That humans are trying to be God, that we don't have a right to decide who lives or dies for our convenience or wants or needs. Um, and that these animals are sentient beings who truly care for their offspring. I know the dairy industry tries to play it off that the moms really don't care about their babies, but I saw it with my own eyes. They were in pain, and they
Hmm.
were crying and they were screaming, and the calves were too. Um, I just it was really it was really sad.
Let's move back to your current venture.
Sure.
What is one thing that's really exciting you about your docu-series besides the premiere on Tuesday?
I think because we're taking such a unique approach, we're trying to go into the series as unbiased as possible. And it's really hard because we're advocates. And we want wild horses to stay wild, but we feel like we can't truly learn unless we hear the whole story, because we'll hear one answer from the government and it will be completely opposite from what a scientist says or an advocacy group says. So we're kind of going into the approach. We're gonna talk to as many people as we can, and we're gonna have conversations and not attack anyone, which is unique in itself because everyone wants a villain, but we're not going to take that approach. So I'm really excited for people to see that.
So how do you separate your own feelings so that you are impartial?
I do it at first. I couldn't. At first, I was a very, very emotional advocate, and I would get angry really quick. But I realized those angry feelings are not going to help the cause. I have to be on everyone's level if I truly want to help everyone. And I have to have conversations. I have to be open minded because I'm not always right. If I don't separate my feelings, I'm not going to help anyone.
Now, I love the idea that you're going to have conversations with scientists, ranchers, government officials, wildlife advocates, because everybody's kind of trying for the same goal
Mm-hmm. Yep.
to manage the land in a responsible way.
Exactly. Yep.
How do you get those people together in a room to have a conversation?
And we're still trying to figure that out. It's really hard because there's already so much tension between all the groups and the stakeholders and the government and the scientists, because it's sometimes not a shouting match, but it almost feels that way because everyone wants their version to be heard. So what Deb and I would love to do is almost do a roundtable discussion, which is in development, to get different people to sit down and have a conversation. But in some cases, it does happen. I know nonprofits who are for the wild horses have developed programs with the borough land management to help wild horses. So it's there, it's starting. It's just everyone needs to get over their egos and just kind of work together.
Now, you seem to have such a great connection with your co host and writer, Deb Lee Carson.
Hmm.
What is it about Deb that resonates with you?
Oh God, I love Deb. Deb is just an amazing human being. I first met Deb. Well, Deb is a pretty well-known photographer in the wild horse world, and I kind of just not stalked her, but like met her and then like became friends with her and made her like me. But what what we really connected. And we have debates and discussions all the time, and we'll get each other to see it from a different point of view. And we just really connect on that level where we can respect each other with different opinions. But we also have the same photographing style out in the wild. Her and I are both willing to hike as far as we need to hike to find those horses in the most respectful way. We use body language to communicate to them, that we're not a threat. And if they feel threatened, we back off. So we're very similar where that they are more important feeling comfortable with us than the photograph itself. So we just jive in that way. And we've just developed such an amazing friendship throughout the past, 5, 6 years because of it.
Now, what do you mean by body language?
So yeah, this is a long, complicated story, but a lot of times horses put pressure on each other, and that could be just with a flick of an ear, a head nod, the way they put their body towards them. So say we're 100 yards away and they see us pop up, we'll turn sideways and cock one of our legs to let them know, we're not in any predatory stance. We're more, like we're part of the environment. We're not here to hurt you. So there's little things like that you can do. And then once they put their head down and they're back grazing, that means they realize we're not a threat. So we can move forward a little quicker. And then, of course, if they get riled up again, we'll do the same thing. So that's kind of our tactic to get a little bit closer to them. And I mean, you shouldn't get really close to them, but, enough where we're still a respectable distance away.
So kind of act like a tree. I'm a tree.
I'm a tree.
Don't see, nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here. We actually dress up as bushes and then we move closer. I'm kidding.
Your docuseries has won many, many awards. Now, which one are you most proud of? And what about that award makes you so proud?
Oh, man. So 4 of them stand out, but one of them is the Wildlife Conservation Film Festival. A lot of amazing people submit their work to that festival, and the fact that we won Best North American Film was just such an honor because there's so many great works of art in that category. So that always means a lot for me because the hard thing is there's the whole issue if horses are native or non-native and if they're destroying our land. So the fact that a conservation film festival recognized that the wild horses could be good for the land will always make me happy and just really excited to have won that award. Another one was the La Femme Festival, which is a women's festival, and it wasn't like a niche festival. It was just any film could get thrown in there. And we won Best Documentary, and I felt like I was part of the film world at that moment because, again, wild horses is a very niche category. And if I could get people who are in film to like it and relate to it and want to see more, then that's a huge step in getting this series, fully made.
Now, you mentioned something about wild horses being native to North America.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks the Spanish brought horses over.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the general perception, but they are not exotics.
No. So it's a complicated subject, and I could tell you what I personally believe, and we touch upon it a little bit in the first episode. Horses originated in North America, and they evolved over, millions of years. They died out at a certain time. But by then, in North America, they died out. By then, they've already crossed into Russia and Europe and all of that. Now, fast forward to when the Spanish settlers came, they reintroduced the horse to North America.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it gets complicated, because is a reintroduced species the same as a native species? I believe, me personally, I believe yes. But there's a lot of people out there who don't believe it should have the same significance as reintroduced and native.
Interesting.
So it's really what you believe, but there's more and more reports coming out from, legitimate scientists that say the horse is in fact native.
Where did you get your courage to quit your job as a creative director and just go photograph wild horses?
It'd been brewing in my heart for a while, and just one day, my husband noticed I wasn't as happy to go to work anymore, and he actually encouraged me to do it, and I'm very, very lucky to have his support that I can quit my career and follow my passion. But it was a mix between his really supporting me and me just saying, I got to do this. It's time. And I wouldn't trade how I did my life for anything, because it's because of my experience in the advertising world. I got into photography and production and film, which gave me all the tools I needed to start this documentary series.
Now, what is one habit or hack that helps you stay on track with your plant-based diet?
Whole Foods makes it really easy to stay on track because there's so many things available right now to the public. I mean, you just type right now, Whole Foods could deliver to your house, because during the pandemic, you just type in vegan and it's all that. I mean, for me, it's not hard anymore. It's just a way of life. So I really don't have a hack for that, I would say.
Well, what about when you travel?
I would do my own food shopping a lot. My own food shopping and bringing food with me. Certain energy bars or protein bars I would keep with me, while everyone's eating their turkey and cheese sandwiches for lunch that we packed. I'll be eating protein bars or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So it's basically just pack it for yourself, and you really have nothing to lose that way.
Now, is there a cookbook or book that you've gifted most to someone transitioning to a plant-based diet?
No.
How about a documentary that you might suggest to somebody?
Okay, I would suggest, oh God, I have so many, but I'll tell you my two favorite. First of all, What the Health? That one really helped push me into cutting out dairy. And then, of course, for someone who's on the fence, Game Changers. They took a totally different approach. It wasn't an animal rights approach. It was a health approach. And it proves super athletes are thriving off the plant-based diet. And it kind of debunks the myth that you need meat to be strong. So those two I would suggest.
Now, finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan, and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I would say fatigued before and enlightened after.
Fatigued and enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Without migraines.
Without migraines. It's a whole new world.
Now, what are some of the ways that our listeners can help wild horses?
There's so many ways. I know this sounds cliche, but if you call your representatives, they take note. A fun fact is, and sometimes I'll hop on Zooms with congressmen to talk to them about wild horses, and this always will stick with me, is that more people call about wild horses than all other animal issues combined. So that means we are being heard, and they are taking note. It's not going to happen overnight. And I know it's scary to get on the phone and talk to people, but it really does make a difference. Also, do your research. There are a lot of organizations out there that have great material. And share the stories on social media. I think wild horses blew up because of social media. I mean, any animal advocacy blew up because of social media, because we now finally have access to see those things. So share. That's the easiest and fastest thing you can do to help.
It was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Now, what's the best way for people to find you on Instagram, the web, social media in general?
Sure. My Instagram is @thismustanglife, as well as Facebook. And my email is jbaldanza@gmail.com. And my website is wildlandswildhorses.com. Please always, if you have any questions, reach out to me. I will do my best to answer them and send you in the right direction.
And don't forget about the premiere on YouTube on 6/9 at 8 p.m.
Yes, please come out and watch it. Of course, if you can't make it at that time, it's going to stay up there indefinitely for you to watch it whenever you can.
Thank you so much for being on Plant Your Seed, Jamie.
Thank you for having me, truly.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.